But the Prime Minister did make time in his very busy schedule last week to sit down with extreme left hysteric Abby Chatfield for a lengthy interview. This wasn't some 5-minute phone-in chat. I think it went on for about 90 minutes. And Chatfield is Dan, so intolerant that she has boasted about unfollowing friends who hold any sort of gathering or party on Australia Day, even if they call it Invasion Day. So this is the sort of character we're talking about. She's also banned pro-Israel people from her platform while hosting those who promote all sorts of ugly lies and hate towards the only Jewish state. Why is the Prime Minister cozying up to a character like this?
Well, he wanted a softball interview, that sort of shows him in some kind of normal setting would be the thinking. I mean, I think I didn't watch all of the 90 minutes. It was just, I don't know anyone who can get through that, to be honest. But the parts I did watch were obviously scripted. It wasn't sort of this freewheeling, interview like Trump had with Joe Rogan, for example, or JD Vance for that matter, where there was no scripting. You could tell that Albanese had the questions in advance. It just kind of shows also the kind of people he hangs out with, people that don't like Australia, that don't support Australia Day. This is a long-running theme of this Prime Minister and this government. So, look, it's hardly surprising that he's talking to these sort of pseudo celebrities on social media who don't really speak to the mainstream. Again, Anthony Albanese only ever speaks to the activist class. He's never spoken to mainstream Australians because he doesn't understand mainstream Australian values.
But he tells us he's governing for the mainstream, because I remember in the election campaign last time around, even when he got elected, we kept hearing that he's not some woke far-left ideologue. Remember that famous front page, "I'm not woke," telling everybody, no, I'm all about mainstream Australian values. And then he thrusts the voice upon us. And now this, he is cozying up to people who are very far from mainstream Australian values. Now, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton has pledged to splurge even more than Labor on Medicare. Labor announced a $8.5 billion Medicare funding package yesterday. Peter Dutton has immediately returned fire. He's pledging $9 billion. And neither policy, Dan, appears to be fully costed. And I do wonder if this does undermine the Coalition's pledge to be fiscally responsible, to be different from Labor. How can we expect them not to blow up the budget if they're spending billions like this willy-nilly?
Yeah, I think Peter Dutton recently has said that the cutting of public servants would save about $6 billion a year, and that presumably would help pay for this commitment. So we'll see if that transpires in terms of the cutting of 30-odd thousand, bureaucratic pen pushers in Canberra, which is a very good idea. In terms of the broader issue here, obviously Anthony Albanese is trying to do Medicare 2.0, which worked in 2016 in a political sense for two reasons. One is that it was sort of believable to a lot of people that Malcolm Turnbull would privatise and sell off Medicare, which wasn't a fair claim, but a lot of people believed it. And secondly, it wasn't actually rebutted by Malcolm Turnbull or the Liberals at the time. So obviously Peter Dutton's not going to let that happen again. And I think it also shows how desperate Labor is. Elections are about two things. What have you done for me lately, and what are you going to do for me next? If Labor is reaching into the bottom drawer to pull out another scare campaign about Medicare, and that's all they've got, then I think they're toast.
Now, let's talk about the ABC. They don't seem to be fearful about any cuts at all. The Department of Government Efficiency, I wonder if they're going to have a look at the ABC. Billion plus we give them every single year to churn out leftist activist nonsense, including attacks against the US Doge. They're at Department of Government Efficiency. The ABC is just parroting Democrat talking points with hit pieces like this. This one says, as Elon Musk and Doge get to work, there is concern that their slash and burn approach will have unwanted consequences. Just ask Megan, a US aid employee who got one of the billionaire's dreaded emails. That was on X, and they've done several articles. And I guess, Dan, I shouldn't be surprised that we've got a taxpayer-funded leftist activist organisation defending another taxpayer-funded leftist activist organisation.
Yeah, imagine shock horror getting an email. I mean, wow, something to be dreaded. It just shows the mentality. It really shows the mentality. You're not allowed to send emails to people now because they might be offended by it. Look, the reality is Australia needs a bit of a taste of the Doge and done in a way that's consistent with Australian policies. You're not just going to transplant something that works in America and bring it straight here. But Senator Jacinta Price has been made head of government efficiency if the coalition forms government, and we need a more efficient government. There's a lot of waste. We just talked before about the public servants, but I reckon if you went through the grant programs, all of the woke grant programs that are spent on transgenderism and whatever else there is, that all needs to be cut. And we should go through the bureaucracy and see, well, where is the waste? Where can we reduce it to get a better return for taxpayers? And clearly Elon Musk has gone in there and had a good look at the waste that's there and cut back on billions and billions of dollars. And Trump has said, well, some of that's going to be returned back to the American people as tax cuts. Now, if we could do that here, well, I think that's a very good thing.
Absolutely, and I wonder what sort of programs we're funding. When you look at all the crazy expenditure in USAID that's been revealed, just so much money going to these NGOs, these activist organisations who are pushing this far-left lunacy. It's not grassroots, it's not organic, it's all funded by taxpayer dollars and pushing things that the majority of taxpayers don't want. Labor's been accused of a mass vote buying scheme amid revelations that they ordered 25 additional citizenship ceremonies to be held mainly in Western Sydney seats. Around 13,000 people have become citizens through this. Labor claims that these extra ceremonies were scheduled to a backlog. They were trying to clear this backlog, but we spoke to the Fairfield Mayor Frank Carbone yesterday on Outsiders, and his local government area was targeted with these additional citizenship ceremonies. He said there was no backlog.
The AEC, which is the Australian Electoral Commission, informed us that we actually didn't have a backlog. Now, if there was a backlog, let us know. We will put more on, but somehow, magically, thousands of people have appeared, and it's my guess that the Home Affairs Minister or his department has asked the AEC to fast-track some citizenship, people that receive the citizenship, and hasn't told the councils.
Very curious. Dan, what do you think is going on here?
Well, it's pretty obvious. It's all political. And, this has been the point that we've been making with the government's policies as it pertains to those, in Western Sydney, that the migration policy is being driven by votes, not by Australian values, not by what's in our national interest. The migration program has been a total disaster from day one under this government. Something like 1.4 million on a net basis have been brought into this country, and that's why we're getting poorer. Mass migration is making Australians poorer. We've had 7 consecutive quarters of negative per capita growth, which is the longest decline to living standards since Whitlam. And now they're just putting more people in without any plan for housing or infrastructure or social services that we all rely upon. Now, we want to be a nation that can welcome migrants, of course. That's been the case since the end of World War II, but everybody knows it needs to be planned for. You've got to have the infrastructure in first before you start bringing people in. And now this is just obviously a vote-buying scheme by Labor. And I think most Australians will look at that with aghast and say we need to have a properly managed migration system, not one that's based on winning votes.
And we're talking here about thousands of new voters, and if they skew a certain way, that could decide certain seats with small margins, and they are expecting a swing against Labor in those Western Sydney seats. So it is a big issue. Before you go, I want to ask you about the elections in Germany. The Conservative Christian Democratic Union has won that election. They got 28.6% of the vote. They're expected to form a coalition with other right-wing parties, but not the AFD, which saw huge gains in its share of the vote. They came in second place, record-breaking 20.8% for them. But I do wonder whether the exclusion of the AFD, which is all about shutting those borders, having a orderly immigration process, I wonder if not including them in the coalition is going to mean that we're just going to see more of the same in Germany.
Yeah, I think it's strange that you wouldn't have the party with the second largest vote share have the opportunity to form government in coalition. And I say that regardless of the political leanings of the party. And I think we've seen this with Geert Wilders in the Netherlands up until recently, and also Marine Le Pen in France, which is if you exclude, parties from governing that have significant shares of the vote, then you are going to anger people, and it reinforces the message of these populist parties that regular people are being ignored and neglected by the political establishment. So if you're a part of the establishment and you're concerned about the rise of populism, the best thing you can do is to include people in a governing coalition, not exclude them. So, yeah, sure, you'll keep them out of government for a few years, but I think it only strengthens the hand that many of these populist insurgencies have. And again, it's going to anger a lot of people who have voted for these parties that say this just proves the point. People who are in power don't care about us.
Absolutely. It's an overwhelming result for right-leaning parties. And yet, if you're going to have a coalition that's going to keep pushing leftist policies, you wonder about the state of democracy in a country like Germany. And that's precisely what Vice President JD Vance was talking about during that groundbreaking speech about the elites almost disregarding what the people want and doing as they wish, regardless of the election results. Dan Wild, thank you so much for your time tonight.